Welcome to The Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. Today, we are curious about which type of work is more beneficial. Is it work from home? Is it remote working? Is it hybrid? Or is it something completely different? So Derek and I did some research, and I'm really curious if we're going to align or not, Derek, because sometimes we don't quite agree with some of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, to get us started, the nerd in you, will you kind of tell
Okay.
us all the different types of work styles there are, the definitions, and give us a little bit of a education on it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is helpful too, just so as we're throwing things around in terms, we're kind of like on the same page about what exactly we're talking about. And so, just one of the ones that everyone's heard of, obviously there's work from home and there's remote, but those are actually different things technically. So work from home is, as it would describe, where the employee has a home office. And so this usually involves like the company even supplying a computer, office equipment, monitors, with an expectation that the employee is going to build an office, their house where they're going to do all their work from. Versus remote, you're just not officially in one spot. So a remote worker might work from coffee shops, might go to a co-working space, might travel, work from hotel rooms. And the expectation there is they're just kind of logging in from wherever. They don't actually have a set home office that they're expected to work out of. There's hybrid, which is it can be a combination of either work from home, remote, and typically go in person. And different companies are kind of, I think, using this as a way where they're not fully committed to work from home or remote, but they kind of know they need to offer something, so you might even just see like, hey, on Wednesdays, you can work from home or work remote, or on the company does it on Fridays, or maybe it's even depending on your role inside the company, the different roles might have a different policy of this hybrid or not. And then I think one that's really interesting is flexible. So hybrid is not the same as flexible. Work from home is not the same as flexible. This typically, like, well, I'll just say you could have like a work from home or a remote or a hybrid, but it not be flexible. Like you're working from home and you're required to log in at 8 a.m. and you're still required to stay at your computer until 5 p.m. That's not flexible. You're just working from home. Well, the whole idea behind flexibility, flexible working, is you as the employee determine it yourself. It's not something that's dictated to you. You decide, like, maybe I want to go into the office today. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to start at 10 a.m. today. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to start at 8 a.m. Maybe I want to work Thursdays. Maybe I don't. And you kind of create it on your terms, how you're going to engage in the work versus it being dictated to you. So Alex, is that kind of helpful to go through all of those different terms?
Yeah, really helpful. I thought work from home and remote was the same thing.
Yeah,
And
it's
hybrid
actually
is
different.
hybrid, but there is hybrid fix and hybrid flex, like
Mhm.
flexible side of it. So a hybrid fix could also be where everyone on our team is going to come in on these specific days. You're expected to come in 3 times a week. It's going to be on this day. And these are the hours that you're working versus there's also hybrid flexible to examples you gave, or even like, hey, you got to come in X amount of days in a month, completely up to you of when those days are, when it's going to happen, and so on. I wish I could see that more common. I don't see it that often.
Yeah, if someone is seeking, flexibility, I think, to your point there, they might maybe inadvertently think, okay, I want a work from home job. But then they go through, they get that, they get a work from home position and realize there's actually no flexibility. It's just working from home. And so sometimes that could be a misalignment of expectations of what they thought was happening. And I do think we are seeing a trend. There's been different trends. I know we're going to get into the different ones, but towards this idea of flexibility of things, maybe even more so valued than working from home or remote or hybrid. Of actually, I didn't realize what I actually wanted was flexibility.
Well, before we dive into our opinions on it, let's talk about some common arguments made for each one. Because when you go and just even on Google, if you just search remote versus hybrid versus, being in office, there are so many articles out there. And it seems like a lot of the information is almost contradictory at times as well. And it's all dependent on which eyes we're looking at it as. Is it more beneficial to the company, to the leader, to the manager, to the employee? So there's a lot of information out there. So how about we just start throwing out a list of common argument made for whichever one, and then let's see if we agree or disagree with them. Sound good?
But yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the first one, the most common one I hear is working in office is more productive.
Oh,
I'm going to say I disagree with that. And survey
Right.
after survey debunks that completely.
100% disagree that it's more productive. And I think too, we could kind of parse like what exactly do we mean by being productive. But yeah, everything that I've seen, data and stuff that people are less productive, usually in an office setting, and just anecdotally, I am far less productive in an office setting.
Yeah, so I think surveys show that teams that work remotely or hybrid are 29% more productive than teams that work in an office setting. But why is that an argument that's being made? Who's making that argument? It's a lot of the times it's managers. So again, to your point, what is the definition of productivity to a manager? And that's kind of more, in my eyes, what I'm hearing is the hours worked versus the deliverables delivered.
Yeah, I think there's like this divide, and it's just some of this is like the classic like manager versus leader type of thinking. But are you task focused or are you outcome results focused? And so for the manager who views everything through the lens of task, they probably do view being in the office as more productive. You're at the computer, you're at your phone, you're doing things, you're clicking on things. But that doesn't mean that more outcome, more results are being accomplished. Like that's the whole idea of just busy work. Like, I'm just doing busy work, but I'm not accomplishing anything.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to the other argument that leaders make and managers make of coming into the office is, I have no idea how many hours my team is working. Well, who cares how many hours they're working?
So in fair, if you judge productivity off of, again, tasks, right? Of you clocked in at 8 a.m. and you clocked out at 5 p.m. You had a 15-minute break, not a 16-minute break or, lunch. Like if that is your definition of productivity, then sure. But if the definition is it's just the results, what were the outcomes? Doesn't really matter how many hours like I took to fill that. Yeah, you're going to view everything. You're going to judge it through a different lens on which is more quote unquote productive.
What are some other arguments you hear? Some common arguments?
Well, I think there's just overall, an inherent, like, if I don't hear from someone, it means they're not working, I think, type of thinking. And so visual, right? It's like the Panopticon effect, almost like a prison, right? If I can be the warden and I can look out on my cubicle farm and I can see everybody is present, then I know that like our dollars are being used well and, our time is being used well. And I guess it's kind of like if someone's just at home, how do I know they're not playing video games and watching TV and all that? And it's sort of like it's irresponsible use of resources if we don't have everyone here where we can monitor everything.
Yeah, definitely. And to the extreme, we even hear managers saying, well, what if my employees have 2 jobs and I don't even know? Which there has been a trend of people taking 2 jobs and working 2 at the same time and collecting 2 paychecks. Yeah, so that's a common thing that we hear. Another one is in collaboration and innovation is more in office versus remote. I don't know how I feel about that one. Do you agree? Disagree?
This is where like, work from home poorly done. I can see like if all the employees are remote and they're all working from home, but we don't have good meetings, rhythm scheduled and, good ways to communicate and good tools to communicate. Sure. But I think it's just more communication. It's because I don't think by default, if we're all in a room together, it means we're going to be innovative either. So I think ultimately it comes down to the communication that's happening between the teams, whatever the setting and just the environment that is created in person can create some horrible environments that definitely do not result in innovation. So I think that one kind of comes down to actually who is leading the team and the culture of communication they create.
Yeah, I think we can keep making a list of all the arguments that anyone makes for in-person, hybrid, or anything. And I think it's all going to keep boiling down to it completely depends on the situation, the structure that's been built around that situation, and the leader. Because you can absolutely have someone that's in person that is controlling, a leader that's controlling, a leader that likes to see that you're sitting at your desk in your cubicle 9 to 5 every day, has no idea what you're doing, versus that same person could be even more controlling and more micromanaging on a hybrid level too. I mean, there's just so many different situations, and it all depends on who's leading and what are the structures that were put in place.
Yeah. What's the pro and cons? But what about this whole day of the completely flexible type of idea where you can come in when you want, stay and work from home, you can start when you want. That idea that I mentioned of like true flexible, what would be some pros and cons for that type of a setup?
I think a con that a pro, there's so many pros I can think of the more I'm enjoying my life, the more flexibility I have, the more I can take care of my kids and go work out and do the things that I have to do in order to show up as my best self for work. I'm going to be more loyal to that place. I am going to bring my best self to that place. I'm going to get better results. Like a lot of that is a pro. But the con I can think of is when I do go into the office, if it's flexible, I can go into the office and I could be the only person on my team that's there. And then I'm just going to end up having all of my meetings in an office over Zoom again anyway. So it kind of gets rid of a lot of the benefits that come from working in an office when it's that way. So
What
that's
are
one con that I can think of.
what, what are the benefits to working in the office? We didn't really fully flex that out. The pros of we all need to go in and we all need to be in the office. What are the pros there?
Socializing, I think, is a really big pro. That water cooler talk that, people say is the socializing, connecting with each other. It's not just about the productive hours that you have, but those unproductive hours that you have in that 8 hour time frame in a working day creates a lot of relationships and bonds. And a lot of that helps with retention as well.
It's funny. I was grinning, and then you said the unproductive time because I was just laughing at one of the things we talked about before is we need to come
It's
into the
true.
office to be more productive. But then your answer was so we can have the unproductive social time. But I agree with you though. That is a valuable thing of learning to work with your teammates and getting to know them. And I know trust. We're going to talk about trust and that being a important thing you might not ever get if you're a completely work from home remote and you're not interacting in person with your colleagues. It's just kind of funny though, because we know that that's what happens in an in-person is a lot of unproductive social time also happens, the water cooler. But you're making the pitch that that's a pro.
That's a pro, and that's actually productivity in a different sense. Like, so for anyone that doesn't know, I'm Turkish and I was born and raised there. And the way business is done there is very different than how it's done in America. And I remember times when I was younger and I would go to like a tutoring school or something. I remember where we would bring breakfast for all the teachers, that we would bring ingredients and we would actually make dinner all together, like a few students and teachers, and we would just hang out. Like, we're not paying them for that time to be with us. Why are we wanting to even hang out with these people constantly outside of the productive hours? But we did. And what that created was that connection of actually winning together a little bit too. Like, the teachers cared more for the students. They got to know us as humans. They got to know what we cared about and why getting an A was important. And we're able to create this relationship. And so learning became more fun. Being a part of that became more fun. We all celebrated getting A's together and we all helped each other when someone was failing. It was just such a different type of connection that I don't think you can necessarily get sometimes in a remote setting of just spending time together, just being together face to face as humans.
That's That's definitely interesting. And, thinking too about the student example too. And I know we're not really going to go down this path at all, but with a lot of schools also going to remote learning and virtual learning, there has been a bad effect in that. And typically like grades, I think overall have gone down, just like attendance and things like that have suffered from moving a lot of schooling into remote and virtual environments versus that in-person classroom experience. So I think a lot of those things are what you're talking about. And there's probably a component too of the accountability that we feel the in-person brings to us as well. And when we're a student versus when we're a worker, we could maybe say as an adult, we're not necessarily looking for that accountability, but maybe we need as a student. But I think it's all like wrapped up into it as the leader, whether you're the teacher of a classroom or the leader of a team, your methods and your tools and your approaches, I think do need to adjust and change for the scenario that you have. And I think Alex too, I know when we're talking and doing some research, what we're seeing is that most leaders, at least in the response to surveys, do not feel like they're equipped to lead and manage remote teams. Is that kind of what you were seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that 49% of managers of remote and hybrid teams said that they were struggling to trust their employees to do their best work, and they were struggling to find out how to lead and manage those teams. 49%, that's a pretty large number.
Yeah. I saw also that in a survey, 20% of leaders rated themselves as very effective at leading a virtual team. So again, that's 1 in 5 think that they're actually effective at it. And when you kind of correlate that to other things going on of high rates of people quitting jobs, moving on from jobs, getting burned out, kind of being happy, that would correlate with the other side of that. If you're working for someone who admittedly is not effective at leading the virtual team and you're on the follower side of that, that's gonna be tough to stay with that company when you feel like your leader's not doing a very good job.
Yeah. And if we have all these leaders that are saying, I don't trust my team when we're remote and I am not able to manage them well enough, at the same time, the employees, 83% of people say that they prefer hybrid or remote working. So we have employees saying, I want hybrid remote working. And we have leaders saying, I have no idea how to manage and here are all the pitfalls of it. So there's this huge gap in between that's going to result in retention and all of the things that you just said too.
Yeah. And then kind of a fascinating layer on both of all this and this idea of trust. And I'm curious for your response to this, Alex, but in one of the big studies that I was looking at, they actually found that remote workers are 22% more likely to trust their senior leaders compared to workers who work in person.
That is so shocking to me. And you told me that the other day, and I think it broke my brain a little bit. And I had to sit on it for such a long time to truly even grasp that idea. I think the more I sit on it, the more I get it. But that is incredibly shocking to me. Like, why do you think that is?
I have a theory, but this is just a wild theory, and this is probably just a silly theory. But my theory is a little bit of it's sort of like a Goldilocks effect of what is the right amount of time to engage with someone, where I think like sometimes when you spend a lot more time with someone and you really get to know them more, that can maybe even hurt trust where you realize, oh, like we have a lot of differences, maybe core value, a misalignment. Maybe when you spend like a little less time with someone, it's still a little bit more kind of mysterious. And maybe there's a little bit more of like a benefit of a doubt, type of thing. So my little silly theory is maybe for the people, and they learn too much about their leaders and they see how they operate too much and they get too much exposure and too much feedback maybe, or too much interaction, and that causes trust to decrease versus some type of like Goldilocks zone, just the right amount of interactions.
Sure. Good. That's a good theory. So it's like, I want to know you in a professional work structured setting versus when I know who you truly are as a person.
That's my
I don't
trust
like
to
you
go
as
down.
much and I don't trust you as
That's That's my silly. That's my introvert, like massive introvert view of the world and interactions. That like for most people, there's a sweet spot now
Yeah.
of interaction where there's still like I said, like benefit of the doubt zone because I don't know too much about you or everything about you type of thing versus 40 hours a week with this person for almost like 2 years. Like I know everything about that person and I'm not trust them. I know who they really are. Type of feeling.
That's so funny. All right, I'm going to counter argue that then,
All right.
because I am also the extrovert. And for me, the more I know someone, the more I understand them and the more I trust them, whether I agree with them or not, too. So we have completely different opposites coming at each other. Another option is I think when you're leading a team remotely, you have to over communicate. And you have to you're very diligent in what you're writing versus if you were just walking in the office and you just say something that just comes to your mind of like, oh, hey, I just remembered this. Like if you are a remote leader, you do have to communicate so much more of what's going on in the day to day, what's happening with each member. You have to be very, very deliberate in the one-on-ones that you have with them because it's not just you're grabbing coffee, it's an actual scheduled meeting with a scheduled agenda. So I wonder if there's more structure and there are more rules around how we communicate with each other that's causing that trust to go up too.
Considering like in a leader of a remote team is just maybe more intentional and careful with all of their pieces of communication versus the in-person might create a lot of casual, informal, accidental communication.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that actually aligns with what I was just saying when you're a social law person, you get like kind of everything and you get the full type of picture. I don't think you actually disagreed with me.
All right, fine.
I want to stick on this topic of trust though, because again, kind of on this vein, like as just getting personal here, again, as an introvert, I prefer working from home. I prefer the remote. I'm fine with, going in person and doing things. Again, kind of like I like to have some control of it, almost like in a flexibility type of thing. But like when it makes sense from time to time, I do really enjoy being, around my colleagues and people that I work with. But on like the day in, the day out, I thrive in a work from home or a more remote type of environment. And I think some of my fear of going in person is that I'm going to be micromanaged in person. And this is kind of something where it's like opposite. And like in this type of study, I actually found one of the common pitfalls or trouble of virtual is that the leaders are more likely to micromanage a virtual remote employee versus an in-person. So what are you kind of thinking about that as it gets to like micromanagement?
Well, I mean, 49% of employees, they don't trust their employer in general, whether it's remote, in office or not. So I think there's a huge gap in trust in general. When we went into a pandemic and we were forced, like all these companies were forced to go into a work from home structure, companies weren't prepared for it. Leaders weren't prepared for it. And I think a lot of fear came up. And from that, control kind of came as a result of it. So a lot of fear of, I don't know if Derek's working or not. I don't know if he has a second job. I don't know this and that. And then because they don't trust you as an employee, they put more control and micromanagement around it. Like how many companies do the mouse tracking now?
Mm-hmm.
What message are you sending your employees if you're tracking your employee's mouse? Like, what is even the purpose of it? The purpose is control, isn't it? It's micromanagement to like the extent of it possibly even could get. It's, are you in front of your computer on your work hours that as you're supposed to be, whether you're doing anything or not? You could just be moving your mouse around, doesn't matter. But that's what I'm going to consider as productivity because I don't trust you to do your work.
Right. Yeah, I think micromanagement is directly related to the trust involved. So on that, and so I think to your point, like maybe when we're in person and the employee walks in the door, and maybe that leader of like, okay, I know they're here, but then they kind of leave them alone, a little bit like at least they're here, they're in their building, they're at their desk, and it's like that's all I need to know. When the employee is not here and they're remote or they're working somewhere else, we need to do more check-ins We need to do more, almost like games. How fast do they respond to that email? How fast do they respond to that Slack message? How fast do they respond to that text message? Haha, it took them 10 minutes to get back. What are they doing? They don't have any meetings on there.
Mhm.
But also I can
Get
see,
that.
how, right? Like when you're talking about control, and it's trust, control, micromanagement. I think they kind of all relate to each other. And if you're an employee who feels like your leader doesn't trust you, why would you stay in that environment? So it makes sense with these things that we see in the fluctuations of the job market, of that great resignation kind of aligned and hit right after this massive work from home movement happened because of COVID and then, survival type of thing. It was kind of like in the months right after that great resignation kind of followed that. And we're kind of seeing the cycle repeat around. So trust is a fascinating thing to kind of cultivate correctly, especially with the remote or the virtual worker.
Yeah, I think it's trust, and it's also coupled that with the leader's capabilities and skills. I mean, as a leader, it's easier to be a leader in person. It just is. It's easier. You see what people are doing, you hear what people are doing. You don't have to train them as much beforehand. You could just hear something and give them the answer at that moment real quick. It's just easier to be a leader and a manager in person versus when you go virtual. If you don't have the skills and you don't know how to manage a team effectively, I think that's where it shows. All of your pitfalls as a manager kind of starts showing. And then that's when you go into control mode. When you don't know how to fix it and you don't know how to help employees be more productive, be better, like teammates and all that, then you start controlling all the small things that go around it, which then goes back to trust.
Yeah. And so when that happens, you could be a remote worker, or you could be a hybrid worker, or you could be a work from home worker, but still feel like you have full work-life balance. It's not the act of working from home, I think, that gives you that sense of work-life balance. It's the trust, the environment, the communication, and do you feel like you are just submitting to something? Do you feel like you have some sort of element of control? Because I think that's ultimately what a lot of people want, whatever the setup going into the office, having a hybrid, things like that, is they want some semblance of work-life balance. And everyone kind of has a ratio, but I think we hear that thrown around all the time. Work-life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance. And I think a lot of companies are realizing that, well, remote work from home didn't actually solve that desire that our employees were expressing of, we want work. They're like, what do you mean work-life balance? You're working from home. But the employee's like, yeah, but you're still checking in on me all the time and calling me late and doing these things. You haven't given me any work-life balance.
Yeah. That was the aha moment I had when I was going through all of the research and just thinking through this. Was I think the hot topic is work remotely or in office. That's the hot topic. And all these businesses are trying to decide which one's more beneficial. I think there's so much, like, that's just one piece of the puzzle. And the underlying thing actually is we're trying to change the way work is done. We're trying to change the way we look at our job and our day to day. And 2020 kind of forced us to see a completely different way of working. And since then, we've just been putting a little bit more questions out there of, well, what if we were able to do this and this? And I think work life, though, is just one part of the puzzle. Like, even think of if 2020 never happened, if COVID never happened, would we still see remote work increase today? Or, like, what are some changes do you think would have happened? I think it would have.
See, yeah, it's such a good question. It's such an interesting alternate history kind of what if. I guess my opinion is that what happened, during COVID accelerated something that was already trending, and just maybe sped it up. And maybe even like sped it up too fast to where companies were like, oh, whoa, like, that didn't work. And now they're dialing it back. It's almost like something that would have been played out over a longer cycle got experimented with very fast. And things were trending that way. but I sort of felt like it kind of went through a phase really fast. And now that's where the trend is on. Again, it's not about work from home. Or remote. It's about flexibility. Whatever, whatever the setup do I have? Do I have flexibility? Kind of create the work-life balance that I want. I mean, I think it was great. I think that for a lot of companies that they experimented with this, we're willing to make some changes. We're willing to try new things, but we also sort of feel like I don't know what you think about this, but I also sort of think like a lot of companies didn't learn any lessons from it either.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because they're so focused on the question in front of them, which is which one's more beneficial, working from office or here? And is it more beneficial for the company, for the manager, or for the employee? Like completely different perspectives versus I think what people are trying to say is I want to work differently. My expectations as an employee has changed. My expectations of what I want from my life and work has changed. For such a long time in the US, we've focused and prioritized working over living. And we just made our life work around our job. And I think now what we're realizing is we can actually work and have a life, and they can also be balanced. And I can actually prioritize my life a little bit more and make sure that my work is around that and I'm still productive as well. So I think that's the really underlying question is what are our expectations as humans? What are we wanting? And I think flexibility is part of it. It's not where
Yeah,
I'm working, it's the situation that I'm in and the boundaries that I have in order to show up as my best self.
yeah. And one of the challenges inherent in that is that work-life balance and flexibility mean different things to different people. Again, I think kind of like when I was going through the definitions, the true sense of flexible working is it's employee led. They share what would actually be flexible to them versus the company dictating the rules or the terms. And obviously, like this is generalization, like there's some different roles and functions that aren't going to, just by the nature of that job or that specific task, it's not going to allow for as much flexibility as other type of roles. But in just kind of a generalized, listen, I mean, even just look what's going on right now in some countries and even some companies within the US with like the 4-day week of what they're able to, and not like that 4-10 thing that I think was a thing like before COVID. That was kind of the thing that a lot of companies were doing.
Mhm.
We're going to like 4-10s. So it's like you still did your 40 hours. We just crammed it into 4 days instead of 5 days. Like it's really fascinating the data coming out of these tests of it's 4 hours normal or 4 days normal hours. And what they're finding is for companies kind of testing this, productivity is going up, revenue goes up, work-life balance goes up, happiness goes up, retention goes up, loyalty goes up. Men, the employees work fewer hours. But the data is just right there. But a lot of companies are, I think, like, I don't care what the data says, we will never do that.
I think again, it's fear. It's fear. And so you respond to fear with control and try not to change and try something new as well.
Yeah. We, again, I'm nerding out again a little bit history, but, like the whole concept of like the 8 to 5 and the 40 hour came from a different area of our lives, of like factories and things like that, where it was literally human production hours of somebody standing at a conveyor belt, and if no one stood there, then the car wouldn't get built or the widget wouldn't get built. It was a whole different era, industrial, when we got industrialized. But now, like all the technology that shifted since then, the ability to just be more productive because of technology, to automate a lot of things, to kind of use AIs to supplement it. And you can get a lot more done now without the same number of hours. And yet we haven't shifted our thinking. We still think like the 8 to 5, or the 40 hours is some sort of like golden universal standard, even though it's been around for like 100 years of however, like millions of years we've existed. Think though, we think it would be logical that as we get more capable and productive because of technology, we should work less. Like the work week and the work day should shrink in fear.
Yeah, fear. Also, did you realize that when we went remote and like the entire world was in the pandemic, we were trying to figure out how to make this work. And did you realize that a lot of the education was for the employees and not for the companies to change.
Yes.
Like a lot of education, podcasts, everything around like how to make remote work better was educating the employee on how to manage your time.
Yes.
Like there was so much of, well, you need to be disciplined and you need to know when you're going to sit and this is my working hours and this is my working spot. And it was all around trying to give structure to the employee to almost make it feel like we're still in the office versus we didn't ask the companies to question, does 9 to 5 even need to exist? Do we even need to come into the office? Do we need to work 40 hours? Do we need to be working at a specific time? What if I'm super creative at night? Am I able to do work then? Like we didn't really question a lot of that and we put it all on the employee and making the employee try to shape their life again into just a disciplined 9 to 5, sit at your desk. Did you realize
Yeah.
that?
It's interesting that you say that, and that it is so heavily focused on almost like conform. This is how we can help you conform,
Yeah.
to the new and still maintain, basically kind of what we were doing before, but do your 9 to 5 and your 40 hours or whatever from your home or from remote in the same way. Yeah, that is interesting.
So I think so far we agreed that it's not necessarily where you're doing the work that matters the most. I think it's a piece of it for sure, but it's really the work-life balance that is the main issue. And something leaders should focus on is whether you're in office, whether you're hybrid, whether you're working from home and you're leading a team, how do you prioritize work-life balance? Right? Is that what we agree? Is that kind of where we got to with our conversation?
Yeah, I think it's that plus like the amount of control that you feel you have over your work-life balance as well. Like, are you able to kind of dictate what that is for you versus again, kind of like the conforming to the standard?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, should we go through maybe some tips of as a leader, how can you promote work-life balance better for your team and for
Yeah,
yourself?
yeah, really.
Okay. I think number one for me is, so today on our podcast, we talked a lot about productivity and what that even means. I think the number one thing a leader should do is define productivity. I think you have to clearly define what each role is on your team. What are the expectations of each role and what are the deliverables of each role? Because I don't need to know as a leader how many hours you're working, but if I am expecting from you, Derek, what deliverables are and you're delivering them, great. Then I shouldn't have any need to even micromanage or question any of the things that we talked about. That's my number one. What's yours?
I love that. And mine was going to be very similar to what you said, but it's this idea of clearly having an idea of what it means to be doing well in your job, what it means to be successful, what it means to be doing a good job. I think everyone, for the most part, wants to do a good job. And when there is that vagueness, it's hard to know, am I doing a good job? Am I going to get in trouble? Is this performance review going to be bad? I don't know. Right. I feel like I'm doing a good job, but I don't know. And again, that culture might be because of a culture where it's defined by the hours you work, the minutes you work versus actually what does it mean when it's full time on this game to be doing a good job, and then coaching and help towards doing that.
Yes. And then I think from there, once you know what measuring success looks like, what expectations are from everyone, then also creating clear boundaries and also safety, like prioritizing safety in your team. So you were giving examples earlier of, I'm going to do some quick tests and send a text and see how long it's going to take them to Slack back or how long it's going to take them to answer back. And then I'm just questioning. That is a huge toxic behavior that creates such an unsafe environment that makes me have anxiety and sit in front of my computer just in case, what if someone calls me? So I think being clear on boundaries of, if you are going to pick your own hours and stuff, maybe it's putting a block on your calendar so the rest of the team knows that you're not available during that time, or being very clear on, hey, we don't work on weekends. and creating that safety in the team, I think is really important.
Yeah, I'd like to. It's following the same thing, but the next one I would throw out there is getting really good at delivering feedback. I think for leaders who want to lead in this type of environment is that they focus on feedback as a way to keep people engaged. Then we were going through a lot of data. I saw that in this big study, the data showed that 80% of employees who receive meaningful feedback are more likely to be fully engaged. And so it's not only just feedback, it's meaningful feedback. And I think that is a skill. And I sort of would guess that, in some of the data of how most leaders feel they aren't effective at leading a virtual team, it's probably also they're not very effective at giving feedback and understanding what meaningful feedback is.
That is such a good point. In order to help your employee retention as well, there's a study that showed just the act of giving meaningful feedback regularly to your team reduces retention by 15%. As humans, we want to know, what does winning look like? Give me feedback and coach me on how I can get better at what I'm doing. And through that, I'm going to be a better employee. I'm going to be a better teammate. I feel confident in my job, and I'm less likely to leave and go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's meaningful feedback. I feel like there'd be a whole podcast episode, so we can maybe think for the future about delivering feedback. But it was an overall communication strategy. I guess this is maybe like my final tip on this is, I think a virtual leader needs to understand that you probably have maybe 10 different ways that they could communicate with somebody. They could Slack them, they could email them, they could call them, they could video conference them, they could do so many different ways. Each way has its own good use and its own bad use. And I think the leader understands which one to use. I'll say the effective virtual or remote leader understands which one to use in the right scenario. Because even for something like feedback, like a text message or a Slack, can oftentimes lack the nonverbal cues that we need to demonstrate empathy and to demonstrate inclusion. And so we might think, no, I constantly am giving feedback. Well, and through what tool? And maybe there'd be some tweaks to make it actually effective feedback.
And being intentional of your written communication. I had to learn that the hard way. I remember you gave me some feedback, Derek, a while back.
About this.
It was great feedback. It was 5 years ago, and I still remember it. And it was how empathetic I am, and on one-on-ones, what a great conversation we're able to have and connect. At the same time, when I would Slack or text my team members, there was no empathy, and it came off as just way too direct. And so it was something that I had to work on, and I didn't even notice that was happening. So I think written communication is really important. My final tip is going to be modeling work-life balance as a leader is so important. Being transparent. Like, if you're going to take a break in the middle of the day to go to the gym, instead of just putting a block on your calendar, put a block on your calendar that says going to the gym. Or if you're going to end work early in order to, I don't know, even go happy hour or go for a walk, maybe put it on your on your calendar where it's so transparent of, I am taking time off. I'm not working 60-hour weeks. I'm taking time off. It's okay for you to take time off. Maybe while I'm on vacation, I send pictures to the team of, hey, I'm on the beach now, or whatever. I think it's so important that you have to model work-life balance to make sure that your team feels safe in order to have their own work-life balance as well.
I love that one, Alex. That is so good. And this was, back early in my career. I remember working for a place where the owner kind of said, hey, at this company, take as much time off as you want. If you want to go run errands, I don't care. Okay, great. That sounds like a great place to work. Owner, though, he was always the first one in. He was always the last one out. He never took vacation. He never took any time. And it made you question on if that was really the case here or not. When you've got a person, saying no, you can do all these things. I don't care. But they were always 100% dialed in and, working all these hours. I definitely question it. Is it actually safe to take time off? Is it actually, am I going to get judged or people is this kind of a game or a trap here? to weed people out. So I really, really love that one of modeling. Don't fall into the same trap as the leader, that your employees are worried about. Just make it very clear that no, this is okay. Look, I'm doing it too. It is okay for everyone to do this.
I like it. Well, I think what we figured out on our podcast today, I don't know if we figured out anything, but we solved all the problems is office versus remote versus hybrid. There's so many different things in there, and depending on the situation is which one is more beneficial. But more than anything, it's not where it is, but it's more the leadership that comes from whichever one you choose. Where as a leader, how do we trust our team more? How do we make sure that we're not as controlling of our team? Do we have clear expectations on what winning looks like? Are we giving each other meaningful feedback, communicating effectively, and modeling the work-life balance? And through that, hopefully we have more trust, more loyalty, higher retention, better results, and we question how we work together.
Yeah, and when someone comes and asks us a survey of, you feel like you're effective with your virtual teams, your remote teams, or hybrid teams, you can feel confident that you can be in the 20% and say, yes, I feel effective.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to our podcast. Follow us on Instagram or wherever else you're listening to our podcast. Let us know if you have tips, if you're a leader and you're having any challenges with remote work or coming back to office or anything, let us know. And we're happy to DM you back or thoughts on it, or maybe even have a part 2 later on.